Hey, welcome to Ask a Dog Podcast. My name is Dr. Sanchez. I am your host for today. Ask a Dog Podcast was started in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. There was a lot of bad information out there, and I wanted to be able to provide something out there that you care about, that can be trusted and worthy to be listening to. So today is December 18th, 2020. So first of all, I want to say thank you for everybody who has supported my channel, who have been able to give me all the likes and the thumbs up. So if you haven't done so, for those who are on YouTube, be able to smash that like button, be able to subscribe and leave comments and give me all sorts of feedback. And so I am excited. For those who are listening through podcast, the way you can support the channel is by sharing it with other people. And if you want to be able to make an appointment with me as your physician, you can download the Medici app. That's Medici. And you don't need a code. There's a link that says I don't have a code. You can find me by my name, Jorge Sanchez, here in Texas. And so today I want to be able to talk about COVID one more time. Okay, but in a different way. I want to be able to talk about the next pandemic that's going to occur, and also the pandemics in the past, and what we can do to really prevent this from happening again. So one of my greatest concerns, the things that I really worry about, is that we're not going to learn from our lesson this time. We didn't learn from our lesson from Ebola. I don't know if we've learned our lesson now, and that I'm really worried that there's going to be some other pandemic that's going to happen, and it could potentially be worse, right? So it could be that the mortality rate for those who with the next pandemic, it could be 20-30%. So let's talk about what actually caused this pandemic, its root cause, and see if we can't figure out ways to be able to change this. And so to go back, I know this seems like forever ago, 2019, right? So in the beginning, with this pandemic specifically, it came from a bat in China. So coronavirus, it has been known to be endemic in bats. We've had SARS before, which is coronavirus is actually a SARS-2 virus. So it's a SARS virus, but it's the novel SARS virus, which is called COVID. And so the thing with coronavirus is that it doesn't actually cause bats to die. In fact, they don't really have any symptoms. It's kind of just endemic, and it's asymptomatic amongst bats. And so you have to say that, okay, bats had to interact with a human. And so bats live in a habitat completely different than humans. So we live in cities predominantly. Bats live in caves. And so it's not like we come across bats all the time. I mean, we come across all sorts of things, right? So we come across birds, we come across dogs, but when's the last time you saw a bat, right? So bats and humans were never meant to mingle or interact at all. And so one of the characteristics of bats that are really perfect breeding grounds for disease is that they kind of have some similar characteristics than we do, in that they live in very tight quarters. So humans, we live in tight quarters, we live in cities, we live in cramped spaces. Bats in the same way live in very, very narrow areas. And so by doing so, because bats kind of live so close to each other, they're kind of breathing on each other. So it's very easy for respiratory illnesses to migrate and mutate and change over time within bats. And the other thing that is a very bad thing that we also share with bats is that they fly. Now you were like, "What? Humans don't fly?" Oh, yes, we do. We do fly. We fly all the time in airplanes. And our ability to transport ourselves is tremendous. And so bats in the same way are able to do that. And so now so you have to think yourselves well, why are humans or bats interact? Why do they interact, right? So bats are at nighttime. Unless you're sleeping outside, which most people don't. There are some people who sleep outside and they get some other diseases from bats that might bite them at nighttime. But in general, humans live indoors and they sleep inside, and bats kind of are outdoors at nighttime, and we're awake during the day. It's always hey, it's a good deal going on. We got a good relationship. We don't interact with you, you interact with us. Except that we encroach into their territory. The wilderness, the forested areas, the jungles of this world. We encroach in their areas. And there's one reason that is a tremendous reason, which is going to be development. And so we don't have, it's not sure, there might be like one or two people in the black who are involved in the black market who decide that, hey, I'm going to go into a bat cave and kill off some bats for as a cuisine for rich Chinese people. I mean, sure, there might be like that going on, but what is much more of a systemic problem is the destruction of habitats that belong to the bats. And so as you do, and for the purposes of agriculture and for the purposes of development for maybe building cities further. And so when you do that, right, when you destroy habitats, it causes those bats to be able to live with other bats in more confined areas. And eventually, you're gonna have some guy with a bulldozer or like with a backhoe who's like having to fight off bats because he's like trying to destroy a cave, right? Or I don't know, like by doing so, by having bats interact with humans, it's a breeding ground for disease. And so this is not the first time this has happened, by the way, right? So like with SARS, this is the second time, and so now, if you look at other pandemics in the past, right? So it's like a similar idea. So like HIV, for example, so developed in Africa, West Africa, and as a result of a agricultural practice of slash and burn techniques, where you cut down, burn forested areas for the purposes of agriculture. And by doing so, you do two things. You cause monkeys and chimpanzees to have to live in tighter quarters because there's less forested areas for them to be able to forage, and also it causes animals to interact in these developing areas with humans, and that's a recipe for disaster. It might have been that, hey, a developer guy with a backhoe decided that, hey, I'm hungry, I'm going to go ahead and kill that monkey and eat it. It's quite possible that might have been the case. But or it can be like, hey, I got to fight off this monkey. He's jumping off and I'm jumping on my backhoe. And so regardless of the actual details of the interaction, the fact is that they are actually interacting because humans are encroaching into their areas. And so, and my worry is that this practice is going to happen in other forested areas. So, for example, in Brazil. And I want to make this connection very clear as to what we can do as individuals and what actions are contributing to this, that what we as people, as individuals are doing that are contributing to a lot of this problem. And so it's going to be our stomachs. And so our meat consumption here in the United States is like just kind of in excess. We eat more meat than I think any other country in the world. And so that meat doesn't come from Texas only. It doesn't just come from Colorado. It doesn't just come from a lot of the grain, the ranch areas. So it also comes internationally in other countries. So like in Brazil, right? So like in Brazil, they are actively trying to deforest the rainforest. They're trying to remove that area for soybean, corn production, particularly soybean, and also for grazing of animals. So why would they grow soybean? Well, because they need soybean and corn to be able to feed these animals that require large swaths of land to feed American stomachs for meat. And so we can actually make a big change in preventing these pandemics by actually reducing the meat consumed, right? So red meat specifically. And, like if you hang out with me in any period of time, right, you'll know that I'm a huge plant-based diet, right? So for health reasons, right? So, and now it's for pandemic reasons. I mean, come on, people, there is no losing in this situation. If each individual decided that I'm going to go ahead and just eat fish and vegetables and mainly plants. If you want to go vegan, sure, right? I love fish. I think fish can lower your risk of cancer, can lower your risk of heart disease. You have to find sustainable fish. I mean, you want to do your research as to if you care about the environment. But if you just care about your health and you're like, I'm just going to eat vegetables and fish and listen to this crazy doctor, then you know how much, the likelihood of a pandemic happening in these areas. I mean, it's like zilch. I mean, so we have to address some other issues, like in China. They have to address their black market for these rare animals that they're really wanting to eat, right? So they have to address their own issues. But we're potentially causing other pandemics, and likely we're causing some of the pandemics of the past. So if you look at the swine flu, and I got my notes over here. Let me look. I went through history and I said, okay, so like with the swine flu specifically, right? So in 2009, 2010, so these are pigs that were harvested for American consumption, right, for pork. And so So the way these animals are being raised are very similar to how bats live and how humans kind of do things, right? We kind of like want to cram things into tight quarters, and so these pigs are forced into tight quarters. Farmers, you got to teach them how to do good hygiene, etc. I'm sure that's a problem, but the root problem is how we go about doing our agriculture, right? So like pigs were never meant to be able to be in tight areas where thousands of pigs are like in just a small little house. And so that's what caused the pandemic, and also other pandemics, such as the swine flu. I'm sorry, the bird flu. So like in, what was this? In 1957 to 58, there was the Asian flu. 1 million people died in China from the avian flu virus. And you kind of ask yourself a question of like, why isn't there like the flu, like influenza from kangaroos? Why isn't there influenza of maybe like bison? Like, why is it that it's always going to be, why is it always like pigs, and why is it always like birds? Well, these are the animals that are in-housed, right? Poorly ventilated areas, and that are living in really, really crammed areas. And these are some of the animals that can reproduce quite quickly, particularly with the chicken, right? And so at least like with cattle, they kind of live outdoors, so there's some kind of ventilation to where you don't see a lot of like influenza that comes from cattle, but you see predominantly in swine and chickens because we're forcing them to do that. And what I mean, like, you can't blame farmers, right? Because they have to turn a profit. They can't free range their chickens as much because that would cut out cost from because you have to be able to produce large amounts of product within a small square footage. And but like we could redo this thing, right? Instead of having like huge industrialized like food production with our chickens and pigs, rather than that, having just a handful of farmers, you have like an actual like profession where you have like tens of thousands of small scale farmers who are doing things correctly, where you're able to allow these pigs to be raised outside and free ranged, and to allow these pigs to be healthy enough to where they're not actually causing the spread. And or we can just eat less meat in general. Right? We can do things in a better way with agriculture, and that's like where I worry where our next pandemic is going to come from. The other thing is that there have been pandemics of the past, like the Black Plague. The Black Plague of the 1300s in Europe had to do mainly about, not only was it because of how Europeans lived in confined quarters, but also because of the hygiene, right? So like when we throw a lot of our food waste into the ground, then that's a breeding ground for rats. And so by improving our hygiene, I think that all food waste should be composted. That's a great way to reduce the rat population by quickly composting these things. Or each individual person compost, right? So anyway, so like the hygiene was the big issue in the Black Plague, but this could really happen again. And I just worry that a lot of people just hope to go back to normal and go back to like this idea of like, hey, this pandemic's never going to happen again. We can get back to like living our consumerist lives. We can focus on our city growth, where cities are focused on like, hey, let's go back in our economy and do growth, as opposed to focusing on resilience. I don't know. I mean, like, I think that we can do a better job, not only by changing our diets to reduce the economics that drive a lot of these pandemics, which is, by the way, a lot of people don't recognize, right? That's a long stretch of thinking points that get people to that point. But also, we really need to change how we go about developing not only growth. We need to focus more on resilience within neighborhoods and cities. So in order to be able to handle some of these pandemics to occur in the future. So like changing our debt structure, right? So like getting rid of debt, and individuals, like we have to be able to like have 3 months savings, like, so, in case of a pandemic, but why not have like restaurants and also like bars adopt that same expectation, But anyway, so like I think that having like currency reserves within on small businesses with restaurants and bars could help be able to shut down things, and also like having this having our government provide stimulus checks. Sure, I think it's great, but I think that what we need to do at individual level from small businesses to be able to have like instead of like adopting debt so that we can like grow quickly, right? Instead of like doing that, but like just be more modest in our growth and to say like, you know what, we need to like under leverage ourselves. We need to focus on cash and having cash reserves in the event that we need to like shut down so that we can still survive as a company after a pandemic or whatever it is, whether it's hurricanes, disasters, etc. So as another thing is like looking at resilience is looking at reducing our travel, right? So like what needs to happen, not only in changing our diet, but we really need to like reduce how much we travel, because again, like similar to bats, we fly, and the way this thing spread the most is basically people traveling, right? So that's how it got here. It got through a plane. In the 1300s, the Black Plague, it showed up through a boat, right? Because a rat jumped off the boat and had a fleas for Yersinia pestis, and so it is the traveling of humans that are really causing the breeding ground for potential problems, and also how we live in a dense population. And so, I mean, I think that like leisure traveling needs to be rethought, right? So we have, we're entitled to vacation. Sure, like have a staycation, have a vacation to like a local area, right? So go to Fredericksburg, go to Austin, but to go on a cruise and to travel internationally is a great way for this virus to change, to actually jump from one country to another. Another thing that really could be a benefit is like doing business internationally through Zoom, and really saying it's not worth it for like the cost of traveling. Like we can do all this stuff like business wise, but through Zoom, right? I think we should automate. You should have like machines transport our goods internationally. I don't think that people should be able to like be transported with our products internationally with our global trading. So I think that that we should also, when it comes to let's go back to resilience in like neighborhoods. One option is that we develop micro businesses to where we don't need to be traveling very far, right? So like if I need a haircut, I can go to my neighbor because my HOA is nice and willing to allow businesses to actually set up shop in our neighborhoods without some kind of fear of reducing our property value, right? So, or like maybe like there's restaurants, like this little like cafe that's across the street where people are like, hey, I get to have a little cafe out in my front yard, and I have a lot of pretty flowers, and I have a lot of like beautiful like classical music or whatever, and there's a quaint place that's over there. My neighbor, I'm gonna go ahead and go there and have breakfast, right? As opposed to like, hey, I'm gonna go like to Navasota and like have breakfast at a further place, and thereby interacting with more people than you need to be. And so, or like growing food, right? So like growing food locally, having like a local grocery store, so local that you can walk to it. Dare I say even that your like a neighbor in the garage has a grocery store because it's fed by a farmer who's actually like 4 or 5 farmers with a neighborhood that's growing food in their front yard. Like a very like self-sufficient, like resilient neighborhoods. And like having pods where it's like these are the essential ingredients of a society. Everything else is just kind of like icing on the cake. But like when it comes to food and micro businesses, we have our neighborhoods, and so having our HOAs think differently. So anyway, so those are my thoughts. Hopefully you guys were able to I mean, I know this sounds crazy, but look, we're in crazy times, and we need crazy solutions to be able to maintain resilience and be able to survive a lot of these things. So I hope you guys have a good time, and sign up for Medici so you can send me messages. If you want to book an appointment with me, you can do so through Medici as well. Just download the app. Look for my name, Jorge Sanchez. Again, you don't need a code. You just tap the link. And I'll also in the description below, as well as in the podcast, I'll provide information on how you can be able to sign up for Medici if you want to be able to schedule something for an appointment with me. So you guys have a fantastic day. Love you guys. Thank you for sharing. Be able to support me by sending it. Smash the like button. Send comments. Subscribe if you're on YouTube. And hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.